Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. Now, we're recording this podcast on Tuesday afternoon, and this morning, one of the biggest stories of the year dropped, an absolute bombshell, which I'm sure you will all be aware of. But before we dissect that, we're going to take a deep breath. And firstly, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Chris Fenton. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Adam. And yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good to hear.
And Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Adam?
I'm doing very well because I've just recovered from the Australian Aviation Awards that took place last week. The night of nights, the Oscars of aviation. Some people refer to them as the Thornies, but that thankfully never took off.
No, it needs to take off.
Unlike a plane, which is what the Aviation Awards are about.
Oh,
See,
he's
done
back.
there.
He's back.
There. Take your first shot, and you will be very dangerously drunk by the end of this episode. Chris, I thought it went really well. Just give us some more information on what happened, how it went. But what do we need to know?
Look, it was a brilliant night. 500 industry people in the room.
It's a lot of people.
Absolutely a lot of people attended the night at the Star in Sydney last Thursday, celebrating all that is aviation. We had... Vince Sorrenti was our MC on the night. All of the Star food and bev staff were walking around with pilots' hats on. The welcome area was themed like an airport check-in area. So you had a cocktail check-in lounge where you could grab your welcome drink, and the entrance doors into the actual awards room were branded Gate A and Gate B. Fantastic night. Adam and Jake look sharp in their suits.
Of course.
It's a rare sight, Chris.
You in a suit?
Me in a suit. It is a rare sight.
I have to admit, me in a suit is a rare sight as well. I'm with you there. But it was a fantastic night. Lots to celebrate. Some fantastic winners on the night. The overall excellence winner, Erin, a fabulous pilot who won 2 awards on the night, but she took out the overall excellence award on the night, and that beautiful custom-made trophy as well, the excellent trophy. Rex winning Airline of the Year and a couple of other awards, so good turnout from Rex there. Great night, I loved it.
We even did meet a couple of our personal fans.
We did,
and I must
indeed.
say, I've got to think to myself, what's going wrong in your life if you're a fan of ours? But these people do exist. It was genuinely nice to meet them.
Wait, you had personal fans?
I was shocked as well.
I didn't have personal fans. Where are my personal fans?
Well, Jake, I have to say you were very busy taking photos on the night, doing our socials.
That's very true.
Yeah.
And for anyone,
Great job.
And for anyone who saw those photos on the night, I'm sorry, I was using a camlet. A camlet, and the tabra was awful. I was using a tablet, and the camera was awful.
But we're going to have some better photos we're going to put up on the website. Yeah. And in the next print issue of the Australian Aviation magazine, we'll have all the details. Yeah. If you want to find out more about exactly who won, go to our website, the Australian Aviation Awards website. If you go to australianaviation.com.au, all the information is there. Congratulations to all of our winners and nominees.
Shout out to all of the winners.
And thank you, everybody in the industry, for coming along, for buying tickets, for sponsoring, for supporting this event. It means a lot to us, and hopefully we can put on another one next year, which will be even bigger and even better.
It'll be back bigger and better next year. But before we go on, because I know we've got a jam-packed episode with lots of news, I've got a couple of shout-outs from the night.
Of course you do. So, always got shout-outs, fans.
We've got to give a shout-out to our friend Chewy from Bonza.
He was. I was going to mention Chewy, and as well, I love Chewy. Chewy was just the passion he had was fantastic. He also did look like a Chewy, like a very big, kind of hairy guy, very, very...
A big, cuddly
exactly.
Chewy. Yeah. No, Chewy was amazing. So Chewy works in the operations centre up in the Sunshine Coast with Bonza. So Chewy, special shout-out. Thanks for your support. 2 other shout-outs.
Rocking the bow tie, by the way.
Yes,
and
he did
the
look good in the bow tie.
on the night.
Yeah.
Bow tie and suspenders,
Chewy was,
classic look.
Sharply dressed. Another shout-out to a listener of ours who commented... just basically saying, hope the night goes a great success and good job on the podcast. So to Sean F. from Brisbane, Sean is actually ex-Virgin Australia cabin manager.
Yeah.
Has left the industry, is now a train driver of all things for Queensland Rail, and absolutely loves his job driving the train. So no chance of Sean coming back to the skies. But shout out to Sean.
Not with that attitude.
Not with that attitude, no. But shout out to Sean. And finally, someone from Rex. I've got a shout out for someone from Sexy Rexy. Lachlan, who is 737 cabin crew with Rex based in Sydney, who is a listener of ours and a massive fan of Australian aviation. So shout out to Lachlan as well. Thanks for your support.
And well done again to Erin Douglas, our Excellent Excellence Awards winner.
Absolutely. Erin's amazing, an amazing young lady. And I had the privilege of presenting Erin an award earlier in the night. She's just such a deserving winner. But great job, Adam. Adam did a fantastic welcome speech as well. Brilliant welcome speech. And it was just a good night.
It was a good night.
Back next year, bigger and better.
Wasn't it? Good night. Now, talking of extra special things, we have on the website released, I think it was, well, it would have been a couple of days ago from when you were listening, but this week we've released a new premium podcast, which is a podcast for our paying subscribers. Jake, tell us a little bit about this, because you put a lot of time and effort into this.
Yeah, this podcast was with Hayden McDonald of Wings Without Barriers. If you are listening, Hayden, shout out to you. And good luck on your incredible odyssey that you're about to embark on. I think it's something like 2 months flying around Australia in a Jabiru J120, leaving from his home near Esperance, and doing a circuit of Australia, because he is looking to educate people on autism and neurodivergence.
Good on him.
He is neurodivergent himself, and he was knocked back by CASA for a medical because of his autism. He is looking to break the stigma around neurodivergence, especially in aviation, and to overhaul some of these, or get some of these rules overhauled without compromising passenger or aviation safety. So if you're a subscriber to Australian Aviation, which you should be, check out our premium podcast with Hayden McDonald on our website. It is a fascinating podcast, and Hayden is setting off on the 8th, which I believe is this Saturday. This Friday. He's setting off this Friday the 8th. I know what dates are. He's setting off this Friday the 8th on his amazing trek around Australia in a Jabiru J120, and we wish him all the best.
Yeah. All the best, Hayden. And what we're trying to do is keep on top of what he's doing and how he's progressing, and maybe we can do an update in a few weeks and possibly get him on the show again when it's all done. Tell us how it went.
Yeah, it went very, very well. It went very, very well.
Right.
That podcast.
Yes. On that.
And looking into the future with my psychic powers, I can see that it will have gone very, very well as well.
Yeah, good on him. An amazing man.
Right. Okay, welcome back. So, regular listeners of the Australian Aviation Podcast will remember last week's episode in which we talked about how Qantas had announced one of the most profitable years in its history. And alongside that, it announced the order of 24, I believe, new international aircraft, the Airbus A350, and also some more Boeing 787s. And I spoke on the show about how this was a fantastic final flourish from Alan Joyce, a man I called the king, a man I called the maestro, and I said it was a fantastic last lap that he'd left in a blaze of glory. I pinned my reputation to my incisive analysis. Jake, tell us how that went.
Well, he's leaving in a blaze of something, Adam. Alan Joyce, this morning, as of Tuesday, announced that he is stepping down as Qantas CEO effective Wednesday. Now, this follows kind of a shocking couple of weeks for headlines as far as Qantas is concerned. We had, of course, the grilling that Alan Joyce, Steph Tully, and Andrew McGuinness faced last week before the Senate Select Committee on the Cost of Living. Qantas then, a day or so, a couple of days later, announced that it was scrapping the controversial deadline, the expiry date on its COVID credits. Because there was mounting pressure over that, especially following the Select Committee. Then the ACCC dropped the news that it was taking Qantas to the federal court, alleging that it had sold tickets to more than 8,000 flights that it had already cancelled and failed to notify thousands of customers that their flights had been cancelled until very, very soon before they were supposed to depart. And so there have been questions about Joyce's salary. There have been questions about all sorts of these things. And so Alan Joyce has apparently decided that enough is enough, that in order to help Qantas, transition cleanly to Vanessa Hudson, he is stepping down 2 months early. He was supposed to leave at the November AGM, but he is handing over the reins to Vanessa Hudson 2 months early and saying goodbye.
One of the interesting things about this ACCC case, which I completely understand, is that Qantas are unable to really defend their position because there is now a kind of court case going on, and of course they have to be careful what they say before they get to court. What they kind of have said is, and I think the wording is, the context was that these flights were sold in one of kind of this crazy COVID period.
It was sort of post-COVID, like early 2022, when everything was sort of opening back up again, and especially I think around or near the Easter break. It was in sort of early 2022.
Now, the reason why the ACCC are able to take this case to the court is because they effectively have special powers to be able to demand data and documents and stuff. So they were actually able to investigate it. They obviously feel they have very strong evidence to claim that this happened, and presumably that there was some element of intentional recklessness about that. We would imagine that Qantas will argue against that and say, this was never an intentional thing to do. And they might also potentially argue about the scale of what has or hasn't happened. Nonetheless, this itself was a big moment, because the ACCC chair came out in a series of interviews next day and said that if they were to be found guilty, her recommendation would be for a record fine. So I think they were looking at kind of in excess of $250 million, both to punish Qantas and as acted as a deterrent to other airlines, but also generally other businesses from doing something else. And of course, this has spiraled and spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. The question would be, Jake, why has Alan Joyce gone early? He's going to go in 2 months anyway. What are the benefits to Qantas and for him for going now?
Quick note, the Qantas statements did say, quote, the period of time that the ACCC's claims relate to in mid-2022 was one of well-publicised upheaval and uncertainty across the aviation industry as Qantas struggled to restart post-COVID. We openly acknowledge that our service standards fell well short, and we sincerely apologise. We have worked hard to fix them since, and that work continues. Some commentary has suggested that Qantas was engaged in charging a fee for no service due to cancelled flights over this period. Our long-standing practice is that when a flight is cancelled, customers are offered an alternative flight as close as possible to their original departure time or a refund. So my guess as to why Alan Joyce has left, and this is sort of backed up by what Alan Joyce and Richard Goyder said, is that this was to give Qantas an opportunity to clear the air. A circuit breaker, I believe, is the phrase that has been used a couple of times, or a chance for renewal. My speculation is that Alan Joyce, it was kind of down to Joyce hanging on for a few more months to try and, cement his legacy once and for all, or Joyce stepping down immediately to try and preserve Qantas's reputation and give Vanessa Hudson the best chance that she had to make a clean break. And I think Richard Goyder has said in an interview with the Australian that Joyce had gone to the board, and Joyce went to the board, so the board didn't push him. Joyce went to the board and said, I think I should step down for the good of Qantas and so that Vanessa can get a clean start.
So there's two ways of looking at this. There's two different opinions. One is that Joyce has kind of taken one for the team. He's decided that he's going to kind of wrap up all this bad feeling that he is rightly or wrongly associated as the face of the company, and he's going to go and hopefully therefore take that pressure off as a circuit breaker. The other argument would be he's actually a coward walking away from the thick of the action, and he's hauled his successor, Vanessa, right into the thick of the maelstrom. I'll start with you, Chris. What's your view on this? Was this the right thing, the wrong thing? Is it going to work? What's your view on it?
I guess you really have to feel for incoming CEO Vanessa Hudson here. Like, it's thrown in the frying pan, I guess. And has Joyce done the right thing in walking away at the moment? In my opinion, no. Was it his decision to leave? I don't know. Can we necessarily believe that Joyce went to the board and said, I should step away now? Don't know. Was he pushed internally going, you better jump now before it gets any worse? There's a lot that will go unanswered. I think this will be a massive test for Vanessa moving forward and shaping Qantas moving forward, how they bounce back from this. I've closely been monitoring the social channels today, and there's a lot of negative feedback and a lot of nothing will change under Vanessa's helm. So I think she's got a lot of work to do to prove herself and her leadership and how she can steer Qantas out of this.
Well, she's a Qantas lifer. She's been there for a long time.
Lifer.
So it's not like this is a totally fresh face.
Correct.
What she does have her advantage is that obviously she was she was or still is, as we record this, the CFO, the number cruncher, but not necessarily somebody that would have any responsibility for this issue of selling
Correct.
tickets if that were proved to be the case. So there's an element that she's blameless in this.
Correct.
If something has happened. Again, it is very difficult to judge this because Qantas cannot give their defence. All of their statements have been carefully worded. They've got to keep their cards
Absolutely.
close to their chest right now, which I completely understand. As a journalist, I always generally see the worst in everybody. And I generally assume most people are awful and work back from there, which is how journalists operate. And of course, I can say I'm only speculating. We do not know what the details are. I personally, on this, find it very hard to believe that Qantas would have purposely done what they're accused of doing. I think the way I see it is that even though this wasn't in the middle of COVID lockdowns, etc., this was a mad time for aviation, and it was wave after wave after wave of stuff of 2 years. And I was there, reporting on that and seeing that every day. You're in lockdown, you're out of lockdown, borders closed, borders open. And then when they thought they got through the whole thing, there's an Omicron wave. It's kind of phantom lockdown that wasn't a lockdown when nobody ever went out, which, caused absolute chaos. Then you have a talent shortage, there's skill shortage, you have massive queues at airports. And I think that the argument Qantas has given that this was a crazy time, it was. And the problems that we've seen at Qantas, we have seen at major airlines all around
Globally.
the world,
Yep.
which is something that just is not reflected in the media coverage here, which makes out that the Qantas is an outlier.
Absolutely.
When in reality, Qantas was suffering the same thing everybody else was suffering from.
I have to say, it feels like a bit of a Qantas witch hunt at the moment. And I almost sit here and wonder if the Qatar...
A kangaroo court, if you will.
It is. Boom, Tish, have a drink. He's here. You almost have to wonder if approval was given to Qatar to operate the additional flights that they're seeking, would all of this be happening right now?
Exactly, and there's an element. This is so many things have happened, so many bad elements of bad publicity from the amount of redundancies they've made, and then obviously hiring people back from all the queues and the cancellations, from the blocking of Qatar flights and how responsible Qantas was or Qantas wasn't, and just generally it feels like it was one thing after another thing after another thing.
I will say. On these cancellations, if the ACCC substantiates these allegations, because they are allegations, they are before the court. We can't say whether they're true or false or not. If the allegations are substantiated, I would agree with you that Qantas is unlikely to have done this deliberately. However, it does speak to carelessness.
Yes,
absolutely.
It's whether it was deliberate or not. If it was not deliberate, then it was careless. And, something should, if these allegations are substantiated, again, before the courts, and if it was carelessness, then still something should be done to make sure that airlines are not this careless in future.
The other thing that is important to mention is obviously we always kind of take the industry view and defend the industry and the people that work there. But a lot of, innocent, ordinary Australians had their lives destroyed, not just by the lockdowns, but also huge damage done by the actions of airlines as well. People who were literally I think it was one story we did, it must have been a year, 18 months ago, through somebody who was like waiting on hold on a Qantas customer service line for like 8 hours, and actually like got all the evidence of this. People who had essentially their money sort of taken off them because they were put into these kind of flight credits, and either they weren't able to get their money back, or it was very difficult to get their money back, or they didn't feel that they were told. And this is a lot of money from ordinary working people.
Yep.
And I think that was why there was so much anger. And I think there was also anger, particularly at Qantas. And I said this before, I don't believe there's another airline in the world that has as high a profile in their country as Qantas has in Australia. It is the most high profile business in the whole country and is put on a pedestal. If Australians want to leave the world and see other places, people take a lot of pride in their national
The spirit
character.
of Australia.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that, to be fair, is something that Qantas absolutely play on, with all our still call Australia home and all the Qantas propaganda. So they play on that too. But nonetheless, I think people took it very personally when they were treated badly by Qantas. It's like being, attacked by a family member.
Yep. And
Would airlines that use mainly jet aircraft put out jetaganda instead of propaganda?
God.
have a drink. But Adam, I'm glad you actually said a few moments ago, this situation isn't unique to just Qantas. Every airline globally experienced 8-hour plus hold times to get through to call centres, staff cuts, closed borders, on again, off again operations, slow startups due to skills shortage. So the situation is not unique to Qantas. No one was prepared for COVID and the effect it had on the industry, the way it affected the industry. And there was no rule book or playbook for this.
Very true.
So they've had to think of things on the fly. They've had to reinvent themselves on the fly. They've had to come out of this on the fly with no necessary game plan as to how we fly out of this.
Yep.
They've had to weather the turbulence.
One of the interesting, actually, before you two came on board at Australian Aviation, and before we rebooted the podcast, we had different guests on every week. And one of the guests we had on was the managing director of Adelaide Airport. And, he said that Adelaide Airport had a kind of pandemic preparation plan, but that plan saw a SARS-style outbreak as being worst case scenario. And in actual fact, what we have with COVID, with all these border closures and lockdowns, etc., was so far beyond that. And like you say, there is no playbook for that.
Yep.
And it's very easy to be a guru in hindsight. Now, if I were Alan Joyce, I would look at it and go, well, hang on a minute. At the start of 2020, it looked 50-50 whether we would even have an airline left.
Correct.
He has said that that Qantas was at points 11 weeks from bankruptcy.
Exactly. Yep. So he said, like, it looked like we wouldn't have any kind of aviation industry left
and
in Australia.
And of course, Virgin went into administration.
Exactly. So he would say, like, not only is this airline, job number one, get it through, and so there's something left at the end of this crisis. He would say, well, mission accomplished. He's also managed to get out of this with enormous profits, which will help pay back some of those huge losses they've incurred. He would say that Qantas still had teams that were able to do those repatriation flights for our Australians that were stranded, in other countries of the world, and get people home. He would point to, 24 new international aircraft that had been bought. He would point to a complete refresh of their domestic jet operation, all new aircraft coming in. And he would point to Project Sunrise, which is legitimately going to be one of the most revolutionary things
Absolutely.
aviation has ever
And
seen.
Project Winton, this massive fleet renewal program.
Yep.
Yes. So he would say, look, I didn't get everything right, and clearly we had delays and cancellations, but he would say that, if you were there in March, April, and as I was reporting on it, and you just said to me, Adam, this is going to be where you're at in 3.5 years' time, you would say that's a fantasy. You would say that was so far beyond best case scenario.
Correct.
And he will listen, and trying to be impartial here, but he will say, well, you've forgotten very quickly. He would also, I would say, point to a lot of maybe ruthless and difficult decisions he made, but he would say those ruthless and difficult decisions are the reason why this airline is still going. Because even though Qantas did have a lot of money in JobKeeper and in supplemented flights, they also didn't get the kind of no-string bailouts that other airlines around the world got.
Correct.
And he would also point to the fact that it was his arguably his negotiation, his diplomacy that was able to work with the government to get that. One of the interesting things at the moment is he's being accused as being kind of in bed with the Labour Party, your old mates of Albanese. Wasn't that long ago he was meant to be in bed with the Libs.
The Liberal Party.
Exactly, so make your mind up. So
it is interesting to consider what might have happened had Qantas gone bust, because we haven't had a collapse on that scale since Ansett.
Exactly.
I mean, even Virgin was not that big of a collapse, and Virgin's sort of come through it out of that. So it's interesting to sort of contemplate what the worst case scenario might have been for Qantas if it had if it had gone bankrupt, if it hadn't managed to turn all these things around.
No, I know.
Could we see a renationalised Qantas if all else had gone down the tubes?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of people I know who bought Qantas shares in the height of the pandemic, and they had the attitude of, wow, the government will never let Qantas go down.
Too big to fail.
Too big to fail. Well, maybe, but the fact that its share price absolutely one of the all-time great crashes of a share price. You look at the graph now on Google, it's still a thing to behold. We weren't 100% sure of that. We didn't know. There was a point in 2020 where it felt like it was genuinely the apocalypse.
Yep.
I was like, this could be the end of days. The airpocalypse. There you go.
There's a take a trot.
So again, it's all very well and good to come out the other end and be like, well, it was a pandemic, it's a once a century thing, we're always going to come out of it. At the time, we weren't so cocky. So no. I do think that if we are now appraising Joyce's history and what he's done with Qantas, we can't just omit the successes, and we can't omit the fact it's still a viable operation.
And on Joyce personally, you sort of asked earlier, is he doing the right thing? I am inclined to be charitable. Whether it's the right thing or not remains to be seen, but I am of the opinion that Alan Joyce at least believes that he is doing the right thing. I don't think that he is throwing Vanessa Hudson under the bus here. I think that, if he is indeed stepping down voluntarily to protect Qantas's reputation, and there is no evidence to suggest that he is not doing that, the whole story out of Qantas is that's what he's doing. If he's doing that, then he is stepping down for the right reasons. Now, whether those reasons turn out to be substantiated is another matter. But like I said, I think that he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Okay, welcome back. So we've talked there a little bit about Alan's exit and almost the case for Joyce and the case for how he may not have done as bad as some of the criticism that we've had of him. Nonetheless, the vultures are circling for him. Now, we had some reaction today from the unions. Now, presumably, on hearing the news that Alan Joyce has gone, they've gone, let bygones be bygones, let's shake hands.
I could hear the sound of champagne corks popping from our offices in North Sydney.
Yes. What has been their reaction to him going? We can imagine what it's been, but what have they?
Some of them have reacted more diplomatically than others.
Good on them.
Yeah, so the TWU, as can be expected, has come out swinging, really putting the boot in as Joyce has gone out the door. Michael Caine said that Joyce's exit is the first good decision the Qantas board has made for a very long time. He did not hold back. He said, Alan Joyce is slipping into retirement 2 months early with a $24 million pay packet, leaving one of the biggest messes in corporate Australia's history in his wake. After finally receiving the public scrutiny he deserves for trashing one of Australia's most cherished companies, Alan Joyce is exiting with a $10 million bonus announced on Friday. This is a classic Joyce move. Pretend to take responsibility while pocketing obscene amounts of money. He must be stripped of those bonuses immediately.
I wonder what the unions say about the bank bosses that profited obscene amounts of
probably nothing good.
Profit and bonuses. And
I don't think the unions are charitable towards anyone who pockets large bonuses. Yeah, not that anyone who pockets a large bonus needs charity.
Very true.
The Australian Services Union was a bit more restrained. Assistant National Secretary Emmeline Gask did condemn what the union said was a merciless drive for profits under Joyce's tenure. She said incoming Qantas management now has a rare opportunity to rebuild the relationship between the airline and its workers and customers. Frontline workers have borne the brunt of years of outsourcing and cost cutting, and their stress levels have soared as travel volumes have returned, but staffing levels have not. This has flowed through to people's travel experiences, with customers enduring cancelled flights, lost baggage, and overall inadequate service. She has called for Qantas to, quote, hit the reset button. She wants, the TWU wants, and as we'll see in a moment, the AIPA wants, basically for Qantas to work more closely with the unions on investing in its workforce, securing people's jobs, improving pay and conditions. She says, if this once iconic airline wants to rebuild its reputation with the Australian people and ensure it is around for another 100 years, it must start investing in the people that made it great in the first place, its people. And the AIPA, the Australian International Pilots Association, the biggest pilots union at Qantas, says has agreed that there is a circuit breaker from Joyce stepping down, and Tony Lucas, Captain Tony Lucas, the president of AIPA, says his members trust that Ms. Hudson recognises the power of respecting and valuing all Qantas staff. He said, we look forward to working constructively with incoming CEO Vanessa Hudson to rebuild our iconic airline into the respected and trusted brand that has made all Australians proud. So the vibe essentially from the unions is, we're glad to see the back of Alan Joyce. We want to draw a line under Alan Joyce now. We want to work with Vanessa Hudson to make sure that workers' interests are represented.
An interesting bit of kind of history is what happened when Jane Hartlock took over at Virgin. Now, she was previously despised personally by the unions. And I think, a couple of years ago, whatever, when she joined, I think my headline was something like, union nemesis, to take over at Virgin. And actually what happened is very quickly, she built a very good new relationship with the unions at Virgin. And what that's always shown me is that even though unions will do kind of tough talking press releases and they will always, have a very public front, they are ironically kind of businessmen themselves. They're business people, and they will always do you a deal. And I think that one thing with Joyce going and taking that kind of bad feeling away from them is there is a potential for a fresh start. And certainly the TWU will be going around that negotiating table and will say, look, what happened in the past has happened in the past. Let's get this onto a better relationship moving forward. One of Vanessa Hudson's first jobs in this role is going to be repairing that relationship, which is sort of broken, because they need to have a better relationship moving forward. One of the issues with Joyce's awful relationship with the unions is it just causes more and more bad publicity, because they're going to be generating more and more bad stories. And one of the interesting things has been all the bad publicity that Qantas has received in the last 18 months, and yet Virgin, who've had many of the same problems in terms of delays and cancellations, etc., they have had almost no bad publicity in mainstream media, and a lot of that is because they have a better relationship with the unions. So I think that's going to be one of the first jobs in Vanessa's in tray.
Speaking of people who personally despised Alan Joyce, we cannot overlook ALP Senator Tony Sheldon.
Oh, of course.
Joyce's longtime nemesis, Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, I believe you said last week, and we're not certain who's who. But Tony Sheldon, again, was another one to give Alan Joyce a kicking on the way out the door. He has also called for the resignation of Richard Goyder. I don't know why I keep saying David. Richard Goyder, the chair of... Sorry to anyone out there who's called David Goyder. I'm sure you're very good at your job. He's called for the resignation of Richard Goyder. He said, the Qantas board cannot hide behind Joyce's resignation. Richard Goyder should go next. The board has backed Joyce's behaviour at every step and must be held equally accountable for the disgraceful state of the company. Sheldon has said, quote, Alan Joyce's Qantas legacy is a workforce split across 38 companies and a brand now synonymous with low pay, insecure work, illegal sackings, and consumer rip-offs. He says, if the board allows Mr. Joyce to walk away with $24 million after illegally sacking 1,700 people, gouging customers, and while subject to an ACCC prosecution, it will be the swindle of the century.
I do. One of the sort of things that's interesting by for context here is that even though Joyce has had a lot of criticism in the last 18 months, Richard has kind of steadfastly stuck by Alan Joyce. And in fact, if anything, it looked like his exit would stretch into next year because he was so backed by the board. So I do understand the argument that if Joyce has sort of said, I've got to take responsibility for this bad feeling and I've got to leave, then I could understand the argument is that Richard would have to go as well. I think if you're Qantas, the issue is that if he goes as well, then it does make them look incredibly guilty, and it makes them look like this is all falling apart. There's an element that if you're Richard Goyden at Qantas, you need to stay at the crease, defend your wicket for at least the next sort of 6 months or so. And
Goyder has said he's not going anywhere. He said that he needs to stay on to oversee the transition to Vanessa Hudson. So he's sort of resisted calls to step down as well. But I mean, as fiery as Tony Sheldon's statement was, I still don't think it compares to one of the all-time classic statements with regards to the retirement of a person in the aviation industry. This was from Albo himself, our Prime Minister back in 2015 when he was the Shadow Transport Minister. A media statement on news that Sydney Airport Corporation Chairman Max Moore-Wilton plans to retire. The press release in its entirety, the statement was good. And I was half expecting something like that from Sheldon today, but one thing with Tony Sheldon and Alan Joyce is he cannot resist putting the boot in. So the Qantas now are in this dilemma that they've got a number of kind of crucial kind of court appearances. One will be their appeal against the ruling that they were wrong to outsource so many people, a couple of thousand people. So they really need to try and win that, obviously. And of course, this ACCC case. Now, this ACCC case, when it comes to the federal court, will be arguably one of the kind of biggest court cases in Australian sort of history. It's going to be so high profile. And whereas usually, Qantas is in court quite a lot, which is the nature of being such a high profile company. But this is going to be something that's going to be poured over every single day. Exactly what is the evidence? Exactly what is the defence? So, I don't know exactly when this is going to take place. Presumably, this is going to happen sometime next year. It's going to be very, very hard for the business to kind of cleanse itself of this bad reputation until this whole thing is over. Correct. And what this does mean is that Vanessa has got a very, very tricky task, knowing that they've got these things hanging over them. When we look at, which is a totally different thing, but when we look at Boeing and the problems it had with the MAX and everything, and again, a massive aviation company that had all of this bad feeling, it was only when the kind of legal proceedings came to an end, it was only when that they had to pay this huge fine that they were able to kind of dust themselves down and kind of move on. So I think the problem Qantas has got is they've got another 18 months or so of misery, regardless of whether they're guilty or not. And it's going to be very, very, very hard for Vanessa to say there's a clean start for a long time. I will be interested to see if Vanessa Hudson, as an aside, sort of continues the history or the kind of the tradition of advocacy that Alan Joyce has been a part of, because very famously Alan Joyce was pro same-sex marriage during the postal survey, and very famously, or infamously, if you are reading some of our Facebook comments, he under Joyce, Qantas has come out in support of the voice referendum. I would say if you're on the Yes campaign now, they probably don't want that back in now. Probably not. No, but I would say in terms of that, yes. I mean, it was when we look back at the gay marriage plebiscite vote, which again was like relatively close when it came out, and so Alan Joyce would be seen as. Remember how calm that was in comparison to the voice referendum. True. That was a dogfight, but compared to the voice, it's like a walk in the park. I would say that on that, and again, this is something that's been erased from history, Alan will be seen as somebody that was on the right side of history. He was arguably, I would say, the most high-profile
gay man in Australia. So he took a big stand there, and I think that Qantas' support and his support was actually a big part of getting that over the line. So again, like, everyone's very negative about him, but he has done some very brave and courageous things, I would say too.
And you know, people are saying that, like, you know, airlines and, you know, companies should stay out of politics, which is fair enough if you know. You don't want Qantas saying, you know, vote for Scott Morrison or vote for Anthony Albanese, sure. But I think this is an issue, and this is something I didn't get to say a few weeks ago because I had a cold. But this is something that, you know, affects a lot of Qantas employees, a lot of Qantas customers. And as an aside, anyone saying that a company, that, you know, Qantas should stay out of politics and stick to flying planes, would they be saying that if Qantas had splashed no on the side of their planes?
Sure.
Controversial. The Facebook commenters are going to hate me.
But you're correct there, Jake. And they're not telling people how to vote.
Yeah.
They're not saying vote yes or vote no. All they're simply saying is we as an organisation are in support of saying yes. But they're not saying you must go and vote yes.
And they're giving people, you know, people from the yes side as well, assistance with transport to get out to some of these remote communities to you know, tell people out there what's going on with the voice.
Correct.
So before we wrap up the show, I'm gonna pose a question to you both now. So Vanessa will be starting as we record this tomorrow, probably as you listen to this today, on the Wednesday. She's in for a tough 18 months. Chris, you're obviously a mate with Joyce. You're one of the most, a very famous, influential thought leader in the aviation industry now. What would be if she came
the
to
Joyce
you,
Whisperer?
The Joyce Whisperer, Joyce Whisperer. If you were, say, an aviation consultant and she said, "I need your help," what advice are you going to give her for the next 18 months? What should she do if she wants to take on this task of sort of turning around Qantas' reputation?
First and foremost, go back to basics and focus on your customer.
Said like a true cabin crew manager.
It's customers keep the airline flying.
One of the interesting things, and we've spoken about this before, is that when you choose who you're going to fly with, the single biggest thing is, and we might talk about the aircraft, the brutal reality, and I shouldn't say this on the show, the average punter couldn't care less what type of aircraft it was. How dare they? But what they
Philistines.
Philistines. But what they do care about and what they remember the most is the customer service. That is absolutely 90% of why you choose to fly with an airline.
Or also the price.
Also the price. That's true. Also the price. That's also the price. But it's kind of like price cross with the quality of service you will receive. And this is it's a very, you can talk about the numbers of delays and cancellations, but I would say that almost everyone that has flown with Qantas in the last year has had a bad experience and has been very loud about it. And I do think it's actually not so
Qantas
much...
and also Jetstar. We cannot forget the contribution that Jetstar is making to that.
True. And I know, even though, again, all airlines have had problems, it does feel from the kind of just listening to people that they have had it bad. So I do take your point that actually kind of like you need to get back to basics in terms of that.
Back to basics. And I think what's important is to re-engage the workforce as well. And I guess my message to the Qantas workforce is, as brutal as this will sound, get over it. Like, honestly, we get you're annoyed, we get you're upset, but don't take your frustrations to work because your frustrations flow through to the customer. And you give the customer a reason not to come back to Qantas.
In your experience, is it when there's bad feeling within an airline staff? Do you see that rubs off on their day to day?
Yeah, absolutely, it does, 100%. And it's not good. Check the attitude at the door when you start shift. Customers don't need to know what's going on behind the scenes. You may be peed off with your manager. You may be peed off with a company decision. That's okay. That's called being a human. But you don't take that attitude through to a customer area where your attitude or your actions will impact a customer's willingness to come back and give Qantas a second go.
We need more Chris Fentons on the airlines, ruled with an iron fist, feared and loathed, but the customers got good service when you were running the show.
Absolutely, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day, customer service. Now, recently we flew, you and I, we flew up to the Gold Coast. We went up with Qantas. It was an okay service. Wasn't amazing. It was okay. We flew back a different airline. The service on the other airline flying back was, in my opinion, disgusting. Will I be likely to go back and fly that airline again based on the customer service I experienced that day? No. But reset the button for the staff there, get over it, embrace Vanessa, welcome her, feed back to her the issues, and help reshape Qantas.
So, Jake, your kind of insight here is that you've probably written more stories about aviation than any other journalist in Australia the last 6 months, which checks out. You're writing for Australian Aviation. You'd be worried if you weren't. So you've written probably hundreds of stories, and many of them are about Qantas. So you've seen this kind of story develop over the last 6 months. If you were advising the new CEO from a kind of a media point of view, what would you do?
As according to WordPress here, 345 stories.
345.
Look, if I was advising Vanessa Hudson, first of all, something will have gone very wrong. But secondly, and you touched on this, Chris, but the other group of people that keep your planes flying are the workforce. Engage with your workforce. You don't always have to get along with your workers, but it's as you said, Adam. Part of the bad air that's been floating around Qantas lately is that the unions have been so angry with Qantas and so angry with Alan Joyce personally over a lot of things, and so. And it's again as you said with Jane Herdlicher at Virgin, the unions despised her, but she sat down, she worked with them, she dealt with them, met them fairly across the table. And if Vanessa Hudson can take a less sort of pugnacious approach with the unions and hear them out and work to address their concerns and come to a good relationship with the unions, things at Qantas will likely get better because it's as I said, your staff are what keep your planes flying. If you don't have pilots, if you don't have cabin crew, you don't have an airline, you just have a bunch of planes.
One of the interesting things about Joyce is the impression.
Also, bring back the 747.
Oh, yes, I agree.
One of the interesting things about Joyce is you always tell the story that he would come on the plane and he would help clean up the mess that was left behind by passengers. He would, roll up his sleeves and do that. And there's stories to this day that he still does this. So it's hard to but see him as the kind of monster he's made out to be. But what does come across is at a corporate level, he wants to win every single battle, and he's quite ruthless about doing that. Now, that's perhaps why the shareholders love him. Perhaps that's why he's seen as a huge success. But I do kind of feel that whoever comes in next, it's almost like you've got to take a few losses as well for the greater good. And I do feel that you make a very good point. You need to re-engage a workforce who clearly have lost a bit of faith.
Yeah, it's good to have a winning attitude. You want to have a winning attitude. It's good to be a fighter. It's good to be a scrapper. But as a wise man once said, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Clearly, Alan Joyce has learned the last two things, but you've got to pick your battles, and the battles that you pick cannot be all of the battles.
Well,
Correct.
On that sage-like note, that one, don't say anything else. You ended it perfectly. Don't say anything else. You ended it perfectly.
Anything else? You ended it perfectly.
We will say thank you and goodbye to Jake Nelson. You've ruined it now. You can say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. And we will say thank you and goodbye to Chris Fenton.
See you later.
We will be back on this show the same time next week. But for now, from us all, goodbye.
Goodbye.